Hey, welcome to Rob Paints Models. In today's video, the first part of how to paint the Triumph of Saint Katherine. I'm going to be showing you how I paint these marble effect bases that people have seen on my Instagram and my Twitter. So starting off, prime the base black. We're going to base coat it with Incubi Darkness. Now technically you can do this with any colours that you want, any colour combination you want. Just look at some reference of marble, pick the colour of your veins, which is what we're painting here, and then paint it that. I'm going over the top and using like multiple colours and a mottled pattern for my veining, but you can just do it with one colour. So while I'm using an airbrush here, you could technically do this with just like rattle can paints, you know, a dark colour and a light colour. Heck, you could just do it straight over the primer if you wanted black veins. So just putting it right up front there. You don't have to use an airbrush for this method, but it is easier. So now I'm applying another pattern with Carbolite green there. I'm just building up a nice little mottled pattern that's going to be underneath this. Vast majority of this you're not going to see because we're going to be masking over this and then spraying a lighter colour on top. But I like to go over the top with these things. Okay, now I'm using Gauss Blaster green, and again I'm just using this just a little bit in places. This isn't really going to show up that much. It's mostly just going to kind of break up some veins where they're with a kind of gradient between them. You'll see at the end. It's all fine. You don't, like I said, you don't have to do this step at all. You can just do one and done with the colours for the veins. So now, this is most important, and the thing that you'll use a lot of, some gloss varnish. I'm using some clear, that's clear with a K, floor polish varnish for this, but any hobby brand or artist's brand gloss varnish that goes with an airbrush will work, or you can use a rattle can gloss varnish. I do it at several points in this video. I change over to using a lacquer-based clear coat because it's more durable. So now, this is the effect that we're going for. And we achieve this with this magic product, Tesco Baby Wipes. Now you can see here, they've actually got an interesting kind of structure. They're actually like cotton spread over an elastic backing. So you can see in one direction it doesn't stretch, in this direction it stretches really far. And this is really, really good for us because we can just kind of break up this pattern very carefully and create, you know, make the holes bigger between all of these strands. And this is where we get our marble pattern from. So it can take a little bit, and obviously you want to dry these out. They are wet, they've got, you know, they're baby wipes. I just use a hairdryer to dry one out and then set about tearing it up and making the holes bigger. Just, you know, give it a stretch, tease it out, just work it, and, you know, get it to how you look at it. There's 72 in a pack for 45p. You can't really go wrong. Once you've got it all teased out, lay it over your base or your model, whatever you're doing with this effect with. Secure it in the back, or you can just twist it around and hold it. Make sure it's nice and tight and up against the surface of the model though. Now I'm using an airbrush here. Again, you can use a rattle can to do this stage. I'm painting Daunting Grey over all of this. It's very important that your masking material doesn't move during this stage, and that you let each coat of paint dry completely before moving on to the next one. Now I'm doing a kind of mottled highlight over that Daunting Grey with Ulthuan Grey. Again, just the more of kind of variation and randomness you put into this, the better the final effect will look. And you get something that looks a bit more like marble. So you can see again, just being very careful not to let that masking material move. And finally, just a bit of dead white, just in a few spots, just to punch it up a bit, build up some contrast on that mottled pattern. I'm not really worrying about highlights or anything here because I'm leaving this as really, really gloss, and that's going to actually sell the effect that it's marble to us. So now for the big reveal. Undo your masking tape or whatever it is you've secured your base with at the back. That's just Tamiya masking tape. And ooh, let's watch that again in slow motion. Look at that. It's very important that you let everything dry completely before you remove the masking material, otherwise it will smudge and smear. And once you've done that and you've cleared off any spare strands that are still clinging onto the surface, another coat of gloss varnish. And again, make sure that completely dries. This is the stage where I used a lacquer varnish from a rattle can in order to give it a much more durable finish. Now, I lost some footage here. I pressed the button when I didn't think I needed to press the button. And I've painted some gold flecks with VMA Glorious Gold. Just kind of picked a few points, painted in some gold flecks. And what I'm doing here now is I'm using Incubi Darkness and a very, sharp brush to kind of pick out some of those veins to make them a little bit more defined. I'm not doing it to all of them. I'm just picking out a few, kind of at random, some that look like they might, benefit from this effect. And I'm just very carefully just going around, reinforcing those veins, and just making them a little bit more contrast added into it, because especially on the steps, where the masking material was kind of diagonally and wasn't flat against the steps, it kind of needs a little bit of extra help in order to really sell the veining. So you can do this as much as you want, you don't have to do it at all on this stage. If you just want the very basic effect, and you're doing it on a flat surface, you're done. You're done already. I also do the same with some Abaddon Black, which I usually put that next to the gold flecks for no particular reason. I just decided that's what I was going to do. Just look at pictures and reference pictures of marble. It comes in loads and loads of different varieties and colours, and just recreate what you see. And once you've done all of that, again, another coat of gloss varnish. This is all to protect the work that we've done, make sure the next step doesn't destroy anything. It's also building up the sheen of this surface because I want my marble to look really shiny like marble. Now I'm using some enamel wash here. So this is a dark yellowish kind of brown wash. Pick a colour that will contrast nicely with the marble that you've chosen. Yeah, the specific colour isn't important as long as it's nice and really high contrast against what you're doing. And use a synthetic brush to apply it into the recesses and cracks. The capillary action should pull it in along with all of the gloss varnish that's on there. It will mean that it will just kind of suck straight into all of those recesses. And the gloss varnish will also allow us to clean this up with a cloth and some Q-tips afterwards, which is the really, really strong advantage of using enamel washes over an acrylic or lacquer in this particular case varnish, because both of those will not react with the thinners that you use, and that's important. Don't use an enamel based varnish and then apply enamel thinners over it, because you'll lift the varnish. Use either an acrylic varnish or a lacquer varnish and it will be all nice and fine. Lacquer paints don't react with anything once they're dry, so that's why it's much more durable. And I'm just going around every single recess on this and just filling it full of this wash. In this instance, I'm kind of erring on the side of, more is better, just to make sure that I get it in all those recesses. And it looks like this. It's a mess. So now I'm just very gently using a lint-free cloth. This is basically my old rag. And I'm using it. I actually use this it used to be for cleaning my monitor, but it's now used for this. And I'm just very gently using this to kind of remove most of the wash off the top surfaces. Now, again, it's important. Let the wash dry fully before you start doing this. You can use a hairdryer to speed it up, but it's much better if you let the wash dry fully, because otherwise you might end up sucking it back out of the recesses, and you don't want that. You want it to stay in the recesses and just to be cleaned off the flat surfaces. So just very gently, take your time, go around, clean everything up. And the reason why I use a rag for this step is it's got a bigger surface area. It's just faster to do a large surface like this than it is to do the entire thing with Q-tips or a paintbrush. I go in with Q-tips in a minute, or cotton buds if you're not American, and some Sans Odor. This is Winsor & Newton Sans Odor. It's basically white spirit without any smell. And we're using this and a cotton bud to just gently kind of lift up the rest of the enamel paint from the wash and remove it so that we've got a nice clean surface underneath with the enamel wash left only in the deepest recesses. Now this cleanup step can take a good long while. I think it took me about an hour to actually get this to the point where I was like, yep, I'm done. And in some cases you might need to go back in and add some more enamel wash back into places you might have cleaned too much out of. It's not a big deal. The great thing about enamel washes over a gloss coat is you can go back and you can edit them as much as you want until you got it looking how you want it. So as you can see here, it cleans up really nicely with the thinner and the Q-tip. And it leaves a really nice kind of recess shade. And you can't do this with acrylic paint because you'd have to use alcohol in order to lift them up, and that has the risk of lifting up the acrylic varnish if you've used it. Lacquer should be okay, but it's a bit too risky. Once you're done, we should have something looking a bit like this. And you can see lots of nice definition in there and all the creases and cracks that are in the sculpt. Let that dry overnight. Cannot stress that too much. Let that dry overnight, then apply, in this case, Mournfang Brown to all of the areas that I want to be gold. This is going to give us a non-gloss surface in order to paint our metallics over. You could use black, all depends what you're doing. I'm doing all of these metal details in gold, and I'm using Vallejo's Metal Color Gold to do this. I'm using a different shade of gold for these details rather than the gold flecks in the marble, just because it's a little bit of extra variation. As you can see, just carefully painting all of that Metal Color Gold over all of those gold bits. Pretty standard stuff. Not worrying too much about leaving Mournfang Brown in the recesses. That's mostly there just to act as a non-gloss base for this paint. This paint doesn't like going over a glossy surface. Most paints don't like going over a glossy surface, to be fair. So once all those metallic bits are done, we should have something that looks a bit like this. Now I wanted to reinforce the contrast on those metallics a bit more, so I'm using some Agrax Earthshade Gloss in order to just try and pick out some of the little recess details around those areas a bit. The great thing is the Agrax Earthshade Gloss over a gloss coat will just suck straight into recesses, so you don't have to worry too much about cleaning it up on the glossy varnished marble surfaces. If you do, you've got a little bit of time, a few seconds, to use some clean water and clean it off where you don't want it or feather it out. Let that dry, and we have something that looks like this. You can see the contrast on the gold areas is much higher, much nicer. That's what we're looking for. So this is why I haven't painted the big Inquisition symbol in the middle, like a different colour and thing. With this particular model, once you put a lot of the parts on top of it, like the relic carriers and the actual sarcophagus, is it? I can't remember. Casket. You can't see a lot of these details, so that's why I'm not worrying about painting the big Inquisition symbol in a different colour or painting it gold or anything like that. I just kind of gave it the minimum that it was needed and called it done. And now, another coat of gloss varnish. This is actually the last coat of gloss varnish, and this is just to make sure that I don't screw up the metallics at a later step, and also to make sure that I've sealed in all of those enamel paints. Just because they sometimes can rub off on your fingers a little bit if they haven't dried fully yet. Now I'm using some Zandri dust, and I've thinned this down to a wash consistency. And I'm just kind of randomly putting this into some of the recesses, using my thumb to wipe it off the surfaces. But in this particular instance, I kind of want this to stain the top surfaces a little bit, as this is going to give us the effect of some dust or concrete. I mean, this is, after all, on a battleground. This is a ruin, so we want it to appear very, very dusty. So I'm starting it off with some Zandri dust, just watered down, just applied into some recesses at random, and feathering it out with some water as well if necessary. And what this will also do is it will create varying sheens, glossinesses on the surface of the model, which will give us different kind of contrast in specular as well. So we'll have the very, very glossy marble floor, and then on top of that the dust will be progressively more matte. The Zandri dust will dry in a kind of a satiny semi-matte finish, and then we'll be applying pigments later, which will dry in an incredibly matte finish. So when I say pigments, I mean some jumbo sidewalk chalk that I got from a pound shop. I'm just scraping some of the white into my palette here, and I've got some Forge World weathering powders for some dry, this is dry mud. Pick any colours that you like that make sense for the marble. Typically, the kind of dust that you'd get from marble quarrying would be very similar to the main colour that the marble is, as opposed to the veining colour, but the veining colour will be in there a little bit sometimes. And there will also be, there'd be dirt tracked in from other places. So I'm mixing in a small amount of dry mud into my pigment selection. These don't stay mixed because they're just dry pigments, that the particles will always be separate. But I'm just mixing them together so that every time I put my brush in there to pick some out, I get a completely random assortment of pigments. And I'm just using a coffee stirrer to do that with. So here, old knackered synthetic brush, picking up pigments. Don't get this brush wet, just leave it all dry. Everything done here is dry. And just kind of push it and force it into the areas where you want there to be loads of dust. In this instance, it works out well if it's, if there's a lot of dust in the recesses. So I'm really, really packing it in there, especially in areas which are completely damaged, like there's some tiles that have been blown up. And so underneath there I want a lot of pigment to make it look like there's concrete underneath the marble. So it's not, it's marble clad, it's not actually solid marble. And I'm just going to go around just applying this everywhere. And again, because of the various varnish coats, you can wipe this off with a Q-tip and some just water. To be honest, you don't need anything else other than just a cotton bud and some water in order to wipe this off before you're done. Then you can apply it again. Fiddle around with it until it looks the way you want, and then I'll show you how to fix this so that it doesn't change colour. Because sometimes if you use varnishes to fix pigments, we don't want to lose the glossiness of the marble in this effect. We want that to stay and we want the pigments to be matte. So if we used a varnish over the entire thing, it would change the entire sheen of the model. We'd lose all of the cool glossiness we've got on the marble. So I'm going to show you how to fix this to the surface of the model so it doesn't come off. It will come off if you rub at it, but just don't rub your thumb up against it really hard. But I'll show you how to fix it so that it doesn't come off and it stays matte as well. So that's what it looks like normally. Now we need some isopropyl alcohol. This is 99.9% alcohol. Do not drink this stuff, you will die. It's just, a bit of a safety warning there. Don't do it. Just get a little capful. You don't need very much to do this. A synthetic brush. Load up the brush and just dab it very gently against your pigments. I go over and do the entire surface of the model with this stuff. And you'll see that it's kind of running into the recesses. And try not to disturb the pigments while you're doing this. You can see I'm being very gentle, just tapping it gently against the surface. I'm mostly loading up the brush with a lot of alcohol on it. So I've got a big drop on the end of the brush and then just touching the drop against the surface and it'll just go whoosh onto the surface of the model. You do this over the entire surface, it will look like it's changing colour. That's just because it's wet. Once the alcohol is evaporated, the pigments will be stuck to the surface of the model, but they will have returned to their original colour. If you use varnishes, it has a tendency to permanently darken the pigment. So, that's the difference. You want to be using alcohol for this. And this can take a while, but once you've got it on there, just get a hairdryer out, dry off the surface, and you will see before your eyes that all of the pigments that you thought probably even disappeared look like they just went away in some cases, especially when I've got white chalk on here. It just looks like it just goes away when you apply the alcohol to it. It will reappear before your eyes, and the best part is it will be completely matte and look like dust, especially against the glossy sheen of the marble. And that will leave us with the contrast between the glossy marble and the completely matte dust. It's a very cool, very realistic effect, which really sells the marble as being marble. And all of this without any dry brushing or highlighting or anything, in fact. This took a long time because it's a big base with a lot of details on it, but I use this exact same method on the basis for all of my Sisters of Battle miniatures, most of which are just a piece of plastic card with some lines scored into them, stuck on top of their base. And it doesn't take very long at all. And like I said, if you do it with a couple of rattle cans, you could probably even batch all of this, just do a whole squad of 10, 10 baby wipes, one round each base, tape it down to a bit of card or something. You can see it. Pigments, they're not coming off. They'll come off if you rub at them. But just don't rub up against, don't rub your thumb across the surface of the base. And you can see the glossiness against the matte pigments. Looks gorgeous. Thank you to all of my patrons and my members for supporting me. There will be a lot more parts for how to paint the Triumph of Saint Katherine. I'm going to be doing not every single bit of the model. Some areas I've covered it before and some I haven't. But there will be lots more coming up as I paint this model over the course of this month. So, busy month for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, you can subscribe to the channel, check out my Patreon, or you can become a member. Click the like button, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.